Hello, welcome to today's webinar hosted by Simplity, Data Intelligence Services Company. As a consultancy company, we have 12 plus years of experience from data-intensive projects, and based on our own methodologies, we also built Accurity, data intelligence platform, helping with data governance. So things like business glossary, data catalog, reference data management, or data quality. But today we will stay more on the side of customer analytics and retention. And that's exactly the topic of the webinar. My name is Dana Toušová, I'm VP of Marketing at Simplity. And today I invited two of our business consultants, Karel and Jan, to present the topic of how to improve customer retention. At today's session, we will take a look on what steps should be taken towards retaining customers. We will look at the use cases from e-commerce and financial services industry, and also on efficient marketing strategies for retention. Now, please sit back and enjoy the webinar, and over to you, Karel and Jan.
Thank you, Dana. Hi, everyone. My name is Karel Zitny, and I have over 15 years of experience in digital marketing and sales. I have been improving performance for clients from multiple sectors, including IT, utility, fashion, electronics, or finance. Jan?
Hello, everyone. My name is Jan Rážek. I also work as business consultant here at Simplity, and I have mostly experience with improving performance and efficiency of active customers at large e-commerce companies, where I use data analytics and data science as well. So, as Dana has already mentioned, today's topic is customer retention. Usually when I start with customer retention, I show this equation and walk the person through it so that he or she understands exactly what we talk about. So usually we start with the E, which means end of the period. So number of customers that we had at the end of the given period. In our case, we can take a look at customer retention rate for the last year. So it would be number of customers that we had at the end of December 31st, 2021. In order not to skew the data, we need to deduct the new customers that we acquired during the whole period, during the whole last year. And this number that we get, we need to divide by the start of the period. So all the customers that we had at the beginning of the period. In our case, January 1st, 2021. Then we only multiplied by 100, and we get the customer retention rate in percent. This is an important metric nowadays because it does not only mean that you can only look at it and do nothing about, but nowadays you can use the predictive analytics and influence it in quite a big way. More or less, all the subscription-based companies, and not only them, are looking at this number, trying to influence it, because they know that the customers that they return to their site or to their business to shop for something make up most of the revenue for them. There is one example from e-commerce in the US, where we know that 8% of all visitors that are returning are, 8% of all visitors are the returning customers. And these returning customers are making up 40% of the revenue for all of those US businesses. So you can really see that it makes a lot of sense to focus on these customers, and you really want to retain them, because if you don't, it might affect your business in very negative way. Because of that, we have this webinar actually, so we can go on and take a look at the customer retention rate a little bit in depth. So when we look at it in numbers, and we take a look at data from 2018 on global level, we can see that the retention rate differs a lot industry by industry. On one hand, we have the media, professional services, or let's say automotive, that reach customer retention at, let's say, 85%, which is a very nice number. On the other end of the spectrum, we have hospitality, travel, restaurants, retail, manufacturing, etc., that manage to retain only somewhere in between 50 and 70% of their customers. That is caused mostly by the nature of their business, because it's very difficult to retain people so that they go to the same hotel over and over again, or travel to the same industry over again, or go to the same restaurant. Due to that, the retention rate looks a little bit different in those industries. When we take a look at the causes of the customer churn, I have picked 4 most important ones from my perspective, which companies should know about so that they know what to focus on to improve and retain a little bit more customers. So first of all, some businesses might be attracting wrong customers. That's a big issue because those customers might want to, for example, spend less money or spend more money, or to have a little bit better product, or to have something completely different. And if you are not able to acquire the customers that are right fit for your business, there's almost 100% chance that they will churn down the line. The second issue is that your customers don't really achieve the goals that they wanted to achieve with your product or your service. So there might be multiple mismatches there, but in case this happens, there's again really big reason for them to churn, and they will most certainly churn. The next issue is the customer support. So from time to time, I think all of the customers can run into some issues and troubles or challenges, and it's a big challenge for you to solve their challenges in an effective and timely manner. If you don't manage to do that, it's very difficult to retain them. Lastly, your customers might think that your competitors can do a better job. Again, that might be an issue of your product, but it can be issue also of your marketing. So you need to somehow improve or find out where the issue lies, improve it, and try to retain most of those customers. When it comes to types of churn, I have divided it into 3 buckets. So the first one is presumed versus absolute churn. And it means that when there's the absolute churn, we really know 100% that the customer has churn, and we really know when exactly, what was the time and date. Example of that can be bank account holder who closed his or her account. So we really know when it happened, and we might also know why the customer decided to churn. When it comes to the presumed type of churn, we don't really know if the customer churned, when it happened, and we definitely don't know why that happened. Example of that might be customer who stopped buying from a retailer who she or he regularly bought from in the past. Example might be also on e-commerce side, because we don't really know when the customer stopped buying repeatedly, why he did it, and when he did it at all. So we can only assume. The second bucket or category is reactive versus prospective churn. So first one, reactive, is quite, let's say, I don't want to say obvious, but I think we know what that means. It is that business has done something that the customer didn't like. So his or her reaction was that they don't really want to do business with them anymore. It's easier churn to mitigate because we know right away what was the trigger and what we can do with that. On the other hand, the prospective churn usually takes a little bit longer period of time. We don't really know what happened, and we don't really know what to change for the future because we don't really know the trigger. Lastly, the time period for churn definition is a bucket for itself, and it's very much connected to the presumed type of churn and to the prospective churn. So example can be also the e-commerce side and 2 types of industries. So the first one can be, let's say, airlines. When you buy some airline tickets, you usually do it once or twice a year. So you can assume that the churn period is somewhere in between, or maybe even more than 12 months. On the other hand, if you are shopping for groceries online, you do it usually, let's say, once a week or once a month, let's say. So that means that the churn period is going to be much shorter, and we need to count with that when we set up some projects when it comes to retention. Lastly, I would like to share how we in Simplity approach retention so that it's efficient. So we usually start with the customer matching because we want to enrich the customer data that we have about the customer, and we want to create something called single customer view of that customer and then work with that. Once we have the customer profile enriched, we will continue with some predictive analytics, especially customer lifetime value and propensity to churn. So we try to predict what is the value of that particular customer for the company for a long period of time, and if he or she will decide to leave the company at some point in the future. The fourth step is to create customer segmentation and find out on which segment of customers we want to focus with retention campaigns. And lastly, we want to employ the retention activities. If you have any questions regarding all these, you can type them into the chat and we will come back to them at the end of the webinar. But for now, I will hand the word over to Karel, who will walk you through customer matching.
Thank you, Jan. So how it goes with customer matching and basically how the customer segmentation is affecting retention and churn. Well, big time. Because when we take a look on customer matching slide, then you can see that single customer view is really complex, and we can get on upper line many data, and it's not always such ideal as it here. And usually in reality, it's a little bit different, that sometimes you're matching sometimes you're missing data on the front end. Sometimes you are missing some data in a retail, like offline data, stuff like that. And also not all the mentioned analysis, as you see below, like some of product analysis, maybe some AI and ML algorithms are not present. But generally, I can say that when you do customer matching right, you can expect at least 10% increase of sales. But when you haven't done it previously in the past, it can be even like 40-50%. Depends on industry, depends on how the company is, what is maturity in the company. The key part is data enrichment, and also how is the whole technology set up. So when we look at the next slide about customer matching solutions, then you can see how it's put together. Basically, for small businesses, usually you use more robust tools, and they need to be well integrated and connected, which comes usually as a challenge. And also we are lacking maturity, sometimes even to the level of a business when it comes to medium. For medium businesses, usually CDP platforms takes place. And the main, as I found in this segment, challenge is usually the process. Basically, it's the process is not aligned to CDP platform, or vice versa, that CDP platform tries to kind of is not aligned to the processes of the company. And lastly, with large companies, when we usually implement master data management tools, or we are offering our biggest clients master data management services themselves, it's usually lacking a little bit flexibility. So when you can imagine that you have a golden record and everything's collected around the golden records, then it takes some time to implement any new features and any new tools into some meaningful output of the whole system. So let's see some single customer view use case. And let's have this use case from the telco company. Basically, in a telco companies, it's most important to sell the plans for the mobiles, sometimes the media like TV and stuff like that. Also, very important are the business plans, which covers also a lot of proportion of the whole turnover of the telco companies. When we have Bob Wank over here on the slide as basically the customer, he's using 5 gigabyte data plan, 100 minutes call. And what we want him to do is basically to upgrade his plan or kind of optimize his plan according his needs. It's really recently known that also many data which we know about Bob Wank are even used for third parties. And basically telco companies nowadays selling our data to other vendors. What we can do with Bob is basically upsell him according his needs when he calls longer, of course, the higher plan, or we can do nice cross-selling with his business plan. It usually goes the way that Bob has two SIM cards. One is for his private use, and second one is for the corporate usage. And generally, in the use cases we do in telco, the personalization scenarios helping to improve the turnover for 10 or more % of revenue. When we go for another slide, or let's say use case, then we can see in offline clients how one possibility how to match offline and online world with customers. And the way it's done in this scenario, when we see this high-level offline customer overview, that the customer starts to enter the website through the mobile device typically. Then he is finding what is interesting for him and putting products in a shopping cart, and then goes to the brick and mortar store or to the retail store physically buys the products. The way how we can influence this offline customer is through emailing and retargeting, but the preliminary criteria is that we have this customer matched through email. Also, this client has high CLTV, and we also have synced, which is very important, POS data. So, for instance, we can get information from the cashier that this client is connected to particular email. Sometimes it's an issue in a process that sales representatives forgets about this thing, or it might be also issue in a sync and integration. What we are doing with this data is that we are creating for the marketing offline purchase lists, and we are recommending to approach these customers different way, especially remove them from some of the marketing campaigns, which might be disturbing for the users and or clients, and they might also prefer some channels. and so they might even love to get some samples, which are and they're more basically affected by the samples. Overall, this scenario can again sometimes improve 10%, but sometimes even more. I would say that the most critical role the most critical, let's say, gap is usually in interconnection between front end, online and offline data. So when we take a look on the next slide, you can see that these gaps are also like not only in the invoices, but it could be also in the media, because usually they spent a lot of money and wasted for the media, which basically doesn't affect our customers. So let's see what's the customer lifetime value then, Jan.
Thank you, Karla. So yes, once we have the data about the customer enriched, we can move ahead for the second step, which is the usage of predictive analytics for predicting of customer lifetime value and the propensity of churn. But first of all, to let you understand a little bit how we work with the predictive analytics, we need to have at least 2 to 3 years of historical data about the customer. And based on that, we are able to get the data, input it into our algorithm, and that one will predict the likelihood of doing something into 1 year to the future of the customer. So we will predict what will the CLTV look like 1 year from now, and if the 1 year from now the customer will churn or not. The data that we need for this predictive analytics is mostly behavioral data. So some browser sessions, for example, or the durations of the session of the particular customer, the page visits, so which pages the customer has visited and when, and what he or she has been searching for. We also need the transactional data, so the number of transactions overall, how much money they spent overall in the past 2 to 3 years, what was the average order value of their orders, if he or she made any transactions in different verticals, in case your business is operating in more than one vertical, and how long they have been inactive, so how many days they were inactive since the last transaction. It's also great to have some information about the demographics of your customers, as well as about the products that you are actually selling online or in a different way. The potential problems that we might run into is the quality and quantity of the data. I have talked about the quantity of the data a little bit, so we need at least 2 to 3 years to the past, 2 to 3 years of historical data. And I think that Karel covered more or less the quality of the data. So if the quality is not of a high enough quality, we are not able to predict in particular way, and the quality of the prediction is going to be quite bad, unfortunately. So when we take a look at the prediction of customer lifetime value, first of all, we should understand what the lifetime value really is. So it's the average value of sale or of order times number of transactions times the retention period. So with this type of prediction, CLTV prediction, we are predicting the average value of sale as well as the number of transactions in the future. And when it comes to the retention period, that's mostly the prediction of churn, which I will get to a little bit later. The biggest benefit of this predictive analytics is rank ordering your customers. So as you can see on the graph on the left bottom side, you can see that on the left, you have customers who are actually unprofitable in the 1 year time. So you invest a little bit more money than you get out of them, which is definitely not the ideal state. And when you move to the right, you can see that their lifetime value increases. And you can also see the median and the average customer lifetime value. This graph in particular will let you understand quite nicely how much you should spend on the customer retention, because you know what the value of your customer is, you know what your margin should be. Therefore, you know how much you want to spend with your customers. It also gives you some understanding on how much to spend on acquisition of the new customers, because you more or less know where they will fit into this graph. And it's one of the bases for our type of segmentation, which I will get to a little bit later. So the next predictive analytics or analysis that we usually do when it comes to retention is the propensity to churn. The way how this works is that we take the input, which is the historical data for 2 to 3 years into the past that we receive from you. We put it in our machine learning algorithm, and we will get a score. The score is based on the number of transactions that person is supposedly, or we predict that he or she will have in 1 year time. In case he or she has 0 transaction, there's high likelihood he or she will churn. If more than one, there is high likelihood that we will retain that customer and that he or she will grow in value for us. So this again helps us to rank order customers, even though based on different attributes. It will help us understand what customers we should focus on when it comes to retention, so that we don't really send any retention campaigns to customers who are not really on the verge of churning. We will also understand the churn triggers, and this is like the second axis for our customer segmentation. So when it comes to the customer segmentation, what ideally we should see is something like this graph. So we can divide your customer base at least to 4 buckets. The first one is low propensity to churn and low customer lifetime value. So the goal for this particular segment is to increase their lifetime value. Then we have a high propensity to churn and low customer lifetime value. And for those customers, usually we recommend to do nothing because they have the lowest priority. And in case your resources are limited, you should dedicate them to different buckets. The next segment is the high CLTV and low propensity to churn. So these are your most loyal customers who are come to you repeatedly and continue purchasing. And your goal there is to like keep them engaged, and maybe try to offer them some cross sells and upsells so that they spend even more with you. And finally, the segment which is the most important for our webinar today is the high propensity to churn and high customer lifetime value. So you definitely want to retain those customers because they spent a lot of money with your business. They have a high value for you, but they are on the verge of churning. And how we can do that will tell you Karel in the use case about the high value customers.
Thank you, Jan. When we take a look on our investments use case, I just want to start first with customer segmentation, and let's in this investment company divide our customers in a beginners, mature, and senior segments. According to what Jan said, the most important are customers who has really high CLTV value, and these we can say are those senior customers. Why? Because they are usually the oldest ones, and also the mostly in the business. They are usually want to use a broker as a CEOs, earning a lot of money. Probably they have their own investor company, and they need basically brokers to invest for them. They usually accept low risk, and they can produce or they can invest a lot of money. And then we have another part, which is a major segment of customers. They're usually regular fathers of the families who having a mortgage. Probably they need to buy a car for the family. So the investment is not so high as in a senior segment, but they can accept medium risk because they're already investing a little bit less than senior ones. But that's like 50-50, that they either doing it themselves, so they are thinking like when I be older or more experienced, I will start to be investor. Or they just having it as a, let's say, side job and just want to neglect inflation, or they just want to have a better investment than you put money in a bank and wait what will happen. And the third type of the customers are beginners. And in a way, it's not just the beginners, that's basically young graduates, which goes from right from the school. And of course, they do not have a lot of money, of course, when you do not have a really rich family. And they are really eager to risk. They are want to go for investment business, but they usually have a low investment. So for them, possibility is to just invest these small portions of money, for instance, in applications, just to get along with the model of the business, or just become brokers themselves. And as you see in an investment use case, there are several steps. In step one, first, it's a kind of customer journey when you invest either into the kind of application, then you can also try to invest through firstly on a website and try to calculate your investments and your revenue on some kind of calculators, either mortgage or investment calculator. And then information about you usually goes to the CRM of this investment company. And when you are, let's say, ready for the higher investments, it's processed to the brokers, and usually depends, of course, on an investment company. When an investment is, let's say, 10,000 euros and more, then you get your own broker, and he takes care of you as a VIP client. And by this, from my experience, I was able to increase the company's revenue of 35% just by aligning of all the data as you see. And what was really necessary was to improve also the processes throughout the company, including better alignment of the CRM and data from the front end. But usually, I predict that it's possible to provide our clients 20 plus more turnover, depend on business and of course the maturity of the company. So let's go to the next slide. Thank you. There's which data are basically used for in investment segment? Well, mostly everything. It's really tricky and it's really complicated because, as I said, the process is the key, and it needs to be aligned with all the brokers, because brokers themselves sometimes in other words, serve you as a guys who are interpreting the data. So it's really peculiar sometimes, but you can get with the right process very great results in investment industry. And what are the gaps in let's see on the other side, thank you. What are the gaps in investment data are usually from the social media again, that you're wasting money on not really interesting customers. Then usually it's not aligned data from your front end with, for instance, your call center. And it's really critical because it really gives you sales signals from the front end that the client wants want to invest some amount of the money, or he brought some URLs. And also it's really critical to have up-to-date CRM. So now I pass words back to Jan, and he will tell you more about improving customer retention.
Thank you, Karla. So once we know who the most valuable customers are, we can deploy some marketing campaigns, or we can ask for help to the sales department or customer department to help us to improve the most valuable customers. The way how we do that is that we firstly need to create some retention hypothesis. So example can be that I assume I can retain additional 10% of customers if I offer customers on the verge of churning a 10% discount. So what is important here, this customer on the verge of churning. So it's going to be targeted campaign only at those, and we would be offering them 10% discount in order to retain them. The next step would be to run a test. We would run an A/B test for a month where 50% of customers would receive that 10% discount and 50% of them would receive no discount at all. Once the month is over, and let's say there is more period of time, so additional month or two to collect the data, we would evaluate it. So the question would be, did I actually manage to retain additional 10% of my customers? Even if the answer is yes or no, we still need to do some data analysis. We need to go deeper into the data and find why. Like what was the reason that we managed to do that or did not manage to do that. So in the data analysis, we want to do this in-depth look, and we want to find out which parts of the campaign we want to reuse in the future and which we want to omit at all because they are not bringing any value. So basically, we can test also these other things. So when it comes to the retention campaigns, we can like play with the targeting. We can target only like 10% of the customers that have the highest value. We can target only 10% of customers that have the highest likelihood of churning. We can combine it, etc. We can play with the channels through which we are going to send them the message, with the message itself, so what we are actually saying to those customers, and the time, like when we actually send it to them. Do we send it after some specific trigger that we know triggers the campaigns to leave the company, or without any time restrictions? The next thing that we can try is the leveraging of incentives. So that would be that 10% discount. We can try without or with and see if there's any additional value. We can also play with the incentive value so that we don't spend too much money on the retention. If we are running a B2B business, or if we have some VIP customers, we can also leverage the call center, and we can try to retain those customers through this channel, as it might be more personal. That would be more or less everything from the main part of the webinar. And now we can let you know what data analysis we had to do to achieve those results that we talked about. So usually in the beginning, we do some data profiling. That's like the first step that we need to do every time, so that we understand what data you actually have, what is the quantity of the data, what is the quality of the data, and what KPIs and ROI we can provide to you. Then we talked about the customer matching. So Karel has nicely mentioned that there really it depends on the size of your business. If it's a small business, we can do it somehow in between the tools through integration. If it's a medium-sized business, we would like offer you some CDP platform that we are partnering with, or maybe not, so that you can create a single customer view. If you are a bigger company or large organization, we would probably use the MDM tool, which would create the customer profile better for you. Then I talked about the predictive analytics. I mentioned the CLTV prediction and the churn prediction. So the data you need for that, as I have mentioned, is 2 years of historical customer data. So mostly data about orders and the behavior of your customers. And lastly, we discussed the customer segmentation. So there are more ways how to segment your customer base. It does not really need to be that advanced as we described it throughout this webinar. There are more ways which are a little bit similar and can give you quite a good results as well. So there it really depends. We need to have at least some customer data, and we need to do the profiling so that we know like what we can provide. When it comes to ways of our working, we usually start with data audit. So we do some first consultation so that we understand what is your data needs, what you want to achieve, etc. We discuss the KPIs and ROI, what we can provide to you or cannot, still without like taking a look at the data. So it's a rough guess. And we discuss if there is any credibility risk. The next step is the data assessment, where we do the profiling, we check the quality of your data, and we also take a look at the integrations that you have in between the tools that you are using. Based on this, we can provide a little bit more concrete look at the KPIs and ROI, because we already have seen your data and we know what we can do for you, what is realistic. The next step is are the data analysis themselves. So as we discussed throughout the presentation, it can be the customer matching, predictive analytics, or customer segmentation. And lastly, we would do the implementation. This again depends on the size of your business. So if you are a small company, we would leverage probably one of your existing tools, or we would implement it directly into your data warehouse or something like that. If you are a bigger company, we would leverage the CDP or the MDM tool that you are using, and we would implement the analysis through this tool right into your data ecosystem. And we would do the A/B testing and harmonization, potentially some automation that really depends what you need. And when it comes to key takeaways of this webinar, I would like you to remember the steps that we walked you through. So the first one was the customer matching, enriching the customer profile so that you have all of the data about your customer on one spot in one place. You have some data quality rules in process so that you know that the data that you can see in the dashboard about that customer are really correct. Then the next step is the predictive analytics. So the prediction of customer lifetime value and the propensity to churn. You leverage the outcomes of these two analyses for the customer segmentation. You find out what is the most important segment for you to retain. And then you continually work on the retention, and you approach the test and learn approach. So you try something, you learn from it, you leverage what works, and then you test again. That would be it from the content of this webinar. So if you have any questions, we are here for you. Feel free to ask, and we will do our best to respond.
Okay, thank you, Jan and Karel. It was really insightful session. For everyone, you can ask your questions also just not using the chat, but also using the microphone, because it has been enabled. Also, the camera can be enabled if you want. So feel free to ask. And in the meantime, maybe I'm interested. You mentioned the project phases on one of the last slides. So what would be the typical length of such project?
Usually, if I can answer, it's somewhere in between 1 month and 6 months. It really depends. It really depends a lot, like on the phase number 2 and 3, from my experience, and it also depends a lot, like how much the customer is actually contributing to that project as well, because we need them to reply in timely manner as well, and that might be sometimes a problem. But yeah, usually it's somewhere in between 1 and 6 months, depending on the how hard the project is.
Okay, I can imagine that one of the most challenging part is at the beginning the customer matching, because it's sort of prerequisite of being successful in such analysis, right? And have some efficient strategies for omnichannel world nowadays. So definitely will be a challenge to achieve nicely. And I was glad to see the options that are there for various size of businesses, for small, medium, and enterprise, with various solutions in terms of data tools that they can use. So thank you for sharing this. Maybe for the audience, do you have any questions? Feel free to ask via chat or by enabling your mics. And Karel and Jan will be happy to answer this.
I just want to add one more thing upon what you mentioned, guys, and that's when you have the most challenging projects. Usually, it's not only about customer matching and segmentation, but usually also about the processes in the company which are not aligned with the technology, and it's really one of the really key pitfalls there.
Interesting.
Tomáš is probably asking.
Okay, Tomáš is asking, do you provide services in customer analytics to all industry types?
Yeah, well, if I may take this one, Jan, I think that we have a possibility to go for almost all the industry types. Usually, the most affected are usually financial business. It's also e-commerce business, but not only these types. It really goes across all industries, including utilities. And there's a big potential for our services as these companies are starting their journey from offline to online and digital world. Thank you for the question.
Okay, thank you. Any other question? Anyone? Okay, it seems that not. So thank you everyone for attending the session. Thank you, Jan and Karel, for such an insightful session. We will share the recording with everyone who registered for the webinar, and hopefully see you next time at some other topics related to customer analytics. Thank you and have a nice afternoon.
Have a great day. Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.